So we're going to move straight on to Navin's presentation. If Navin has been able to come back and join us, I hope he has. Navin Piplani is Principal Director of AHRC Heritage Academy. He's joining us today from New Delhi, and he's also simultaneously taking place. Oh, there he is. I can see him. Simultaneously participating in an ECOMOS meeting. So thank you very much for making the time to speak to us. And I'll pass over to you now, Navin, and get you to introduce your talk yourself to save a bit of time. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Hannah and Rodney, for inviting me to be part of this very important and relevant subject, which many of us across the globe are, struggling and engaging with various degrees of successes and failures. The topic given to me by Hannah is equally challenging. How can heritage research help build resilience to climate variability and climate change without exacerbating existing inequalities? And she said, "Would you like to? You want to speak? You want to tweak it?" And I said, "No. Let me engage with it. It's challenging. It's difficult. Let me head on." And this is what I'll be presenting today. Various perspectives from this part of the world, and the reality is that we deal with on day-to-day basis, with again various degrees of engagement and successes and failures. But here is it. We are going to spend next 8-9 minutes looking at scenarios with existing inequalities within the context of India or Southeast Asia, where I primarily belong. And I must also acknowledge that the possibility and opportunity to be here also links back to Climate Heritage Network that Kathleen just touched upon. It's a huge, interesting space for experts and researchers to explore, engage, network, and address the various challenges and issues related to climate change. So I'm going to really take the phrase that Andrew Fox uses in his starting statement, which is, we must understand that climate change is not necessarily essentially a natural phenomena. It's an anthropogenic phenomenon. It's caused by humans, and it is the impact is then multiplied because of various natural elements coming together. So it is primarily caused by all of us, and therefore it becomes a huge responsibility for all of us to take charge and resolve it. And it gets even more difficult when you are in a situation where the aftermath or the so there's a core, and then there are these surrounding issues. And if you're already in a situation where several types of inequalities in your social, cultural, political system exist, and you're on the one hand looking at this great, almost unimaginable scale of human-induced natural phenomena, and you are actually, almost kind of stuck in a situation which is a given, where people are already struggling due to one reason or another, for survival, for education, for health. These are matters of their daily concern. And climate change comes in much later in the priority list. And the reason, I think, as I understand more and more, and as I engage more and more, is embedded in the existing inequalities that we are all facing. These inequalities could be based on demographic characteristics, which include gender, race, ethnicity, religion, and age. Religion is a key and important factor to remind, in the situation that we are in. Then there are several economic factors, the access to assets and income that people who are suffering or who are vulnerable, they have. And then the government attributes, the governance attributes rather, the political will, how much uh, how much people who are in the decision-making position would want to engage with. And if you have, again, a country like ours where there are multiple parties, political parties, there are state, central governments, their relationship with each other, it can add on to the already existing complexities and challenges where the access to bare minimums like health, education, housing, financing actually all depend on what the political masters and their equations with each other at regional, central, and state level, kind of exist, and how much of the political space they want to negotiate or rather bargain uh, uh, in the situations when people are facing these calamities. Uh, Now, here's an interesting inequality and climate change cycle, and I'm using this from Nazrul Islam and John Winkle's paper, which is part of United Nations report of 2017. It's available online. Um, they already highlight the fact that the inequalities are multidimensional and equally their impact will be multidimensional. So you've already got a very difficult situation where you're dealing with an octopus or perhaps an organism which has got multiple faces, hands, etc., etc. And then you've got a population base which has got great fishes in its composition, scale and scope, where people who are at the lower end of the ladder, economically, politically, socially, etc., the exposure levels are different than those ones who are perhaps at the top of the ladder, and which, if we can call them disadvantaged in some sense or challenged in some sense, when they face climate hazards, or let's say when climate hazards come upon them, the losses that these people who are disadvantaged or at the lower rung of the ladder are disproportionate. They are not uh, anywhere close to the losses in terms of assets or income suffered by people who are at the top end. And then, this kind of feeds back into the vulnerability. So to start with, you are a vulnerable or a disadvantaged, I don't want to use the word again, a disadvantaged group. So you are exposed to these kind of challenges, but then the impact and the fact that you're not able to deal with it and the losses that you have faced because of that push you further down into the levels of exposure and if we can say the challenges or disadvantages that you. So it's a cycle. One has to basically break into the cycle, and that's the difficult task. That how do you do that? You can see two images on the right, huge areas of, and these perhaps are basically farmlands. So if there's a villager who's going to be looking at his farm for income for the next 1 year, and that farm has got drowned due to floods, he's not only he's not only vulnerable to the losses, he doesn't even have anything to go into the future. So he's doubly uh, he's doubly damaged in a way, socially, culturally, economically, and then would follow series of diseases and epidemics and this that. So the suffering starts not when the calamity happens. The suffering starts after the calamity has happened, and that just goes on increasing the gulf and then it's very difficult to recover. I think it's very difficult to deal with, even comprehend such situations. So I'm just going to take only a couple of examples because it's a vast subject and we don't have, we can only have limited discussion. So if you look at, we've established that there is a relationship between climate change and poverty and livelihood on one hand. What heritage research or researchers or academics, etc., can do is not only identify, and when I went and looked at this presentation again, I said, perhaps identify is not the right word. Perhaps the right word is to foresee the effects of climate change on poverty and livelihood, projections, already anticipate what is going to be the scale of damage, and we already know that socially and economically disadvantaged and marginalized people are disproportionately affected. The overall conclusion is that climate change is exacerbating inequality. So there's no doubt on that, and there is a lot of evidence available on my right slide. Uh, so we are already dealing with a situation that is a given. Now here's a picture where you see, the mix of population that is going or is affected due to flooding, and this is an urban scenario. So you've got shanty towns or slums, and because they are low-lying areas, they're cheaper areas for people to stay, and then this is what they face. The other example is just the opposite. So in the previous one, there was abundance of water, flood, and here there's lack or scarcity of it. And the point that I'm making with these two is that there's increased exposure of certain class of people. Therefore, they are more susceptible to the damages which are caused to them, which makes them less able to cope with and recover. So it's a cycle which goes on because there is increased exposure and they're susceptible. They become less. They are less. Their capabilities are less to cope with them, and then it goes on. And the second relationship was between gender and age, and we saw it's children, it's elderly people, it's women, especially who have to perform tasks that are more exposed to climate, such as fetching water or looking for fuel wood. The impacts of climate change are different for women and men, with women likely to bear the greater burden in situations of poverty. So that gets added on with poverty livelihood. So this is something that I wish to propose. Is already happening at the Climate Heritage Network, where we are suggesting that there are several subgroups, and we are looking at engaging critically and proactively with the impacts of climate change on inequalities. One of the critical areas is to explore and value traditional knowledge as climate change technology. There's a lot of knowledge already existing in the communities, traditional communities, and one could look at that, as a way forward. We also need to look at local culture and combine it with sustainable development. And there was a very interesting paper yesterday where the speaker said that the development itself means, in the local colloquial language, to be able to sustainable and go forward. So when we talk about sustainable development, local culture, local histories, local practices need to be brought forward. Understanding and accepting climate actions by local communities, and how have they been dealing with such calamities, because it's not today. This has been happening for a long time now, and there are certain tribes, especially in the island nations, where they already know the coming of tsunami, and they can already recede back, and the damages are less. And finally, we need to look at how the burdens and benefits of climate change can be shared, and its impact equitably and fairly. So the gulf which exists, is there a way to deal with it, address this gulf, and try to narrow it as much as possible? That was all that I had to say, and I'm just ending with this interesting image which only appeared yesterday in one of the national dailies. It just presents the picture while we speak what goes on. Thank you.